So you've got tons of people traveling in all different directions carrying this story. It's a place where, there's just a lot going on at the time. Again, not today, but back then, main hub of activity for this area, right? And so I think that's one thing, is that when you have to contextualize the time period and where and when the story happened, it was definitely a lot of activity, and I guess a lot of movement would be happening.
Yeah, my
I'm
publicist.
glad that you actually
Go ahead.
actually mentioned that too, because Oren and I were doing some research, and I'll let Oren kind of fill the listeners in a little bit on it because he dug a little bit more into it. But you have like the wizard story of that turning into a dog in Maryland, and then you have the Snarly Yow story in West Virginia, and then you have this story in West Virginia. And since you said it was like a middle crossing ground where everybody kind of intermixed with each other, I almost kind of wonder if it was like you took multiple stories and people played telephone with it, took the pieces they liked of this one, pieces they liked of this one, and it just kind of intermixed and turned into a handful of different stories in the same area that have some of the same kind of ideas and bullet points to them. But the only reason that happened is because of all this middle crossing happening in Middletown. And it's like a cluster of all these different stories, and people, just play telephone and chose what pieces of each of these different stories they wanted to kind of converge together to create their own folklore. And then that spread out to different regions. And that could possibly be where the whole Bell Witch concept came in, is that somebody took it over that way with taking part of this story and part of this story. And then the wizard from Maryland could also be the reason why the word wizard gets used in the wizard clip story.
Yeah,
I thought about that as well. So just a little bit of background for the listeners. I'm sure both of you guys are familiar, but I think it was in the 1700s. There's this guy in the South Mountain area of Maryland. His name was Michael Zittel Jr., and he was known as the Wizard of South Mountain. And he was said to be in possession of this like ancient German spell book. And there was this monument, Washington Monument. It's Washington Monument State Park now. That was built on his family's land, and it's been theorized that, he used this tower, this monument, what have you, to conduct magical occult rituals that somehow summoned or opened a portal for these black dog-like creatures. So just a little bit of background for the listeners. But yeah, Shane, I did also notice that parallel, similarity, whatever you want to call it, between this wizard terminology and all this same type of activity in this area.
Well, isn't that interesting that Adam Livingston went to visit a conjurer in the South Mountain to get help?
Mm-hmm. No, when you said South Mountain earlier, that's the first thing I thought of.
See, I've been thinking about this since then, too. Him and I are thinking on the same wavelength on this one. Especially when you use the word wizard, I instantly associate it with the wizard from Maryland.
Yeah, and so Middleway was on the Great Wagon Road. It was basically the first national highway. It was built all the way from Philadelphia down to Georgia, and there were a couple places where you could go across the mountains. One of them being near Middleway, and it would go into Kentucky, and another further south would go into Tennessee. But yeah, that Middleway was right on basically the superhighway, the one superhighway we had at that time.